just published my 7th book, and in this video, I'm gonna share with you 7 lessons that I have learned about the drafting process that are making my drafts far easier to write. These are things that I was really keeping in mind when I was writing my most recent book, and these are things that I am currently keeping in mind as I am tackling my next draft, and that are serving me very, very well. So I'm just gonna jump right into it and give you each of these things and talk a little bit about what they are and how they're bettering my process. The first lesson is sometimes it's good to edit as you go. I know this is a very controversial one and some people will not agree with me. I will say that if you are a new writer who is writing one of their first books and you find that stopping and editing as you go really slows down your motivation, do not do it. I am just talking from my personal experience, and I also did not edit as I go for a very long time. This is only something that I started doing with my last book and that I'm now doing a little bit more, but for the first 6 books that I ever wrote and published, I never ever edited as I went. But the reason that I've started to do this a little bit more, and I'm not talking about editing as I go, like I go back and I really clean up the prose and fix the grammar and really dig into it and try to level it up. I'm talking about going back and cutting things and moving things around and deleting things and playing with the story a little bit more. But the reason that I do that is because sometimes I will be drafting a book and I will be moving in a particular direction and I will start in the very first chapter in the direction that I want to go in, and everything is clicking together and the characters feel right and everything feels good. And then I will just be, somewhere in the middle and somewhere in the book, and things just start to feel a little bit weird and the characters don't feel exactly like they did at the beginning, which they also shouldn't because a book is a transformation, but they're starting to feel less like themselves and the plot is losing its sharpness and direction, and just generally things aren't feeling right. And if things aren't feeling good and if things aren't feeling right, I don't like to actually draft that prose. I like to stop and figure out what the problem is, fix the problem, and then continue in a direction that is more productive. So I've been finding it really useful to, when I'm hitting a wall or things just aren't clicking together right, to just stop and reassess and go back to the earlier chapters and dig into them a little bit more and figure out exactly what the problem areas are, change it around. Maybe I'm not rewriting the whole thing, but I can rewrite it almost as a script, so I have the dialogue in, because that's what I like to do when I'm doing first drafts. Sometimes I don't do dialogue tags, I don't do quotation marks, I will literally write it like a screenplay and just do character dialogue back and forth, or just bracketed notes to myself describing exactly what's happening to fill in the blanks if I'm just trying to play out an idea and see if a certain idea works, because it's a lot faster for me to describe what is happening instead of actually writing it in prose. And that exercise helps me get the manuscript back on track and allows me to continue with my draft. So I have a little bit more of a jerky drafting process now. I don't just start a draft and write all the way until the end until I finish it. Usually, I'll start a draft, and then if something ends up happening that takes the draft sideways, I'll back up a little bit, I'll change some things, I'll recourse correct, and then I will continue forward. And I found that that method is actually helping keep my drafts more high quality at the beginning, because I can always make sure that they're focused and kind of directed. And I found that the whole don't edit as you go saying that a lot of people like to give out as writing advice, that I also have given out as writing advice before, is not 100% true. I'm a strong believer that everybody who gives writing advice using the words always do this or never do this are not taking into account the full picture, because writing is an art form and there are bunch of different ways that you can use words to create art, and these rules are not always applicable. I think it's really important to understand the rules of the craft and know how to work within them before you start breaking them. And I think that the whole advice of don't edit as you go is a very useful piece of advice for perfectionist writers who are early on learning how to write a book, because if you are constantly second-guessing yourself and editing as you go, then you can get bogged down in the perfectionism of it, and then you can never get to the end. But as you have a couple of books under your belt and you start to get more confident, it is helpful to edit a little bit as you go, just to make sure that you are staying on course, but not to go and do grammar and stuff. The second big lesson that I've taken from drafting 9 books is if something feels wrong, it usually is. If things in your book feel muddy, it's probably because they are. If things feel unfocused, it's probably because they are. If you're not getting the butterfly feelings writing a particular scene, like a romantic scene between 2 characters, it is probably just because they don't have enough chemistry. You are your internal compass, and your experience writing your book is what's going to determine your reader's experience. If you're not getting the feelings you want your reader to have when you are writing, that means that your readers are not going to be having those feelings either. So paying attention to your feelings is very important. This is not something that I had until I wrote my most recent book. I didn't have an intrinsic sense for this. I was very focused on trying to build a story that intellectually was structured well, that had characters that changed and went through things, and intellectually my outlines worked and I was really happy with them, and I still am very proud of them. But from a feelings perspective, they didn't evoke the same feelings in me that my most recent book did, and that's because I started really trusting myself as my own personal compass for my storytelling. Now, I want to make it very clear that this is very different from feeling worried about like writing your first book. If you were writing like your first book or one of your first couple of books and you're in the middle and you're overwhelmed and you're nervous and like you don't know where it's gonna go, it's different to have that kind of perfectionistic feeling compared to the feeling I'm trying to talk about. I don't want you to think that because you're nervous about writing your book that there's something wrong with it. Like, continue writing your book. Don't allow that to get in the way of you finishing your book, but it is something to bear in mind that if something just doesn't feel right to you, once you finish the book, that is something that you can revisit and work on in editing to get better. Trust yourself and trust your experience with it, because if something is just giving you a weird feeling or feels like it's bad, then there might be something that you can do to improve it. And on the flip side, if you're obsessed with a part of your book and you just absolutely love it, that probably means that you're really onto something and that part of the book is very strong. The third thing that I've learned and that I really try to keep in mind when I'm drafting is that my goal is always to chase my excitement. I write commercial genre fiction. I read commercial genre fiction. I devour commercial genre fiction. I absolutely love it. My goal when writing books is to replicate the feeling that I get when reading books that I absolutely love. I love the feeling of being obsessed with a story, being unable to put it down, wanting to search up fan art all the time, wanting to go read fan fiction of those characters. The feeling of not being able to draw for the life of me, but still wanting to make fan art of my favorite characters, like I did when I was in elementary and high school, and I would trace them on like other people's art on my computer and just color in the details and pretend that I could draw and just have notebooks and notebooks and notebooks of fan art that I would trace of other random faces and things online, and just because I wanted to create something because I had such strong feelings that those characters gave me. That is one of my favorite feelings in the whole world. That is the feeling that I like to chase when I'm writing my books. So if I'm really excited about a particular thing, that is enough for me to trust that and to run in that direction. If I'm excited about it, that means that there is something there. If I get bored writing something, that means and tells me that there is something that I should move away from there or something that needs to change. I like to treat my drafts like I'm playing with the world. Like, it should feel playful, it should feel fun, it shouldn't feel super serious, and that has served me very well because it has allowed me to write books that are just filled with things that bring me a lot of joy and a lot of pleasure and a lot of emotion, and that makes it very fun for me to write, and it also has proven more successful in my reader reactions because my readers are getting more invested in the stories. And that's super awesome. The fourth lesson that I've learned is don't always make your characters suffer. I know there's a very common piece of writing advice about taking your characters and doing the absolute worst thing that you can do to them over and over and over again, and that can become like your most interesting story. And I really took that to heart when I was writing They Stay, and I just continuously wrote really tough situations for my characters to go through. It was just one wallop after the other, and they just kept going through really tough stuff, and things just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse for them. And reading it is definitely like exciting because it's like, how are they going to get out of all of these situations? But I've noticed as a reader, the thing that really makes me want to come back to the world is like the warm and gooey feeling that I get being in that world. In order for a story to become almost like a comfort read of mine, I want to be able to be friends with the characters. I want them to be in a world that I would also want to live in. It is hard for that to be the case when I'm just constantly torturing my characters all the time. It's not really fun for readers to read about characters getting tortured all the time. This is not to say that you cannot torture your characters. This is coming from the person that just wrote a book inspired by Saw. You can torture your characters, and you should, but you don't always want to default to doing the absolute worst thing that you can do to your characters and making life as miserable for them as possible, because then your readers are just going to feel like they're just reading an extended torture sequence, and it's emotionally exhausting. And so doing the worst thing to your characters is not always the thing that you should do when writing, I've discovered. I've really enjoyed starting to mix in more feel-good things into my stories. Like, my characters go through some really, really tough stuff, but I also have a lot of scenes like where they're doing things that just make them happy, and when they're like just being a found family, and where they're just having like really funny interactions, and they're having really heartwarming interactions, and it's not just constantly like using them as a piñata for 300 pages or 600 pages. In the case of the love trials. But this is also probably determined by the types of books that I read. I really love reading serial killer thrillers and like crime books and thrillers and horror books, but I also just really love stories where there is a lot of found family and where there's a lot of humor. The serial killer stuff isn't really exciting, but it's the characters and the closeness of the characters that really brings me back to books. And so that is something that I've noticed about my reading habits and that I like to bring out. But if you really like reading books where, you know, people are used like piñatas for extended periods of time and just things get worse and worse and worse and worse and are pretty miserable, then you totally do you. I know that there are totally books like that exist and that do well, so it's really depends on your audience and what you personally like as a reader. That's another thing that I have started taking to heart. The fifth lesson is layering is my best friend. Thinking about my drafts in layers has absolutely changed the way that I approach books. It's very difficult for me to hold everything in a world and in a story in my head at the same time. And I have a lot of things that go on in my books. There's a lot of stuff that happens, and I find it really hard to just try to focus on and like figure out every single subplot at the same time. And so usually what I'm doing, and like what I've started doing, is focusing on the main plot and like the most important subplots, writing those, and then after that going and fleshing it. Like, I will have mentions if I'm aware of like other plots that will be happening. They'll kind of be mentioned sporadically throughout the book, but then I can save that for later. And once I have a draft, I can go in and really bring out another subplot and really make that detailed and add a lot more stuff into that. And I can go bring out certain details and add certain details and just do things one at a time so I don't have to do everything at once. I'll even do this for entire subplots. If I have a very large cast of characters and I have some characters that just aren't very present in my initial conception of the story, they might not really feature in my draft at all. But then later on, when I'm doing later drafts of the same book, I can really focus on that character, figure out what they are going to do in the story, and then I can give them my undivided attention and then bring out that subplot in the book. This happened a lot when I was drafting The Love Trials, my most recent book. In that book, my main character is the sole survivor of a serial killer who killed her entire family, and she is dealing with a lot of grief from that. This happened when she was 13, but she lost her mom and her dad and her sister, and she's been alone ever since. And in my first draft, the grief was just so big that it was too much for me to, for some reason, I don't really know why, it was just really hard for me to spread the grief out over all of the characters, like over dad, mom, and sister. And so in my first draft, like, she obviously was grieving them all, but like she was really grieving her dad, and like she would talk about her dad all the time and she'd barely mention mom and sister, and that was something that I knew that I would have to come back to. And so in later drafts, so draft one, it was really just like she'd talk about dad all the time, but then in later drafts, you know, I did a whole pass like, okay, now we're going to talk about mom, and then mom started becoming really present, and then I was like, all right, now we're going to talk about sister, and then sister became really present. So in the final version, all three of them had like her relationships, my main character's relationships with each of the members of her family are very present and very there, but that is not something that happened all at once. It's something that was really piecemealed out through my writing process. The same thing happened with even full characters in The Love Trials. I have two characters in particular that really got basically zero screen time in my original draft, and I had in revisions had like a full editing pass where I was like, I'm gonna give this character a subplot, and I just fully went on and dug into that and wrote that into the book, and that's not something that I did right at the beginning. So allowing myself the time and the peace to not have to deal with everything right off of the bat, and to figure out plots and subplots one at a time, and figure out details like when the time is right to do so, has completely changed the way that I think about drafting. And I like to think about drafting almost like I'm painting now. Like I'm painting a story and like putting together a story. But when I'm starting the painting, I first do like, a full coat of like one color, and then I add a couple of like, of the next color. And then, I mean, I'm not an artist, I don't paint, but this is how I envision painting happening. I'm kind of picturing painting a tree. And so it's like if I'm painting all the green and I'm like, I've got all of the green branches and I'm just doing kind of one coat of green. And then after that, like I start adding the brown for the branches. And then, maybe I do the big branches first and I don't do all the little ones. And then I add all the like little brown branches. I add all of the like leaves to the tree afterwards. And after that, it looks like a beautiful tree, but things like I didn't paint everything at the same time. I had to do it in layers, and I had to let the layers dry before adding the new coat of paint. And that mindset has really changed the way that I draft and made the process so much more enjoyable. My sixth lesson is that you don't need to figure out everything about your world before you start writing, nor should you. This doesn't necessarily apply, like if you are writing an epic fantasy based on like a D&D world or a world that you've already created, this doesn't necessarily apply. I know there are a lot of people that like to world build and then write a story in that world, but I am not one of those people. I like to write a story and then world build around the story to create a world that can create this and like support the story that I wanted to tell. And so I always start with the story first. I will figure out like the bare minimum that I need to for how the world works, and then just use my drafts to explore it. I will add rules constantly based off of emotion. Like if there is a scene that I want to write and I have absolutely no idea how it happens in the world, but it requires like a certain rule to be added to the world building, I just pretend that that rule exists and I write the scene. And then in a later pass, once I'm adding that world building layer, I'll go back and make sure that I have created a rule and a justification for why that scene can happen, but I'm not going to box myself in until I actually know what I want the story to be. I'm a plotter, and I think that it's really helpful to have an idea of what you want your story structure to be before you start writing, or just generally do some planning as to what your major plot points are going to be. But I really don't think it's as important to world build before you start writing. I think it's more interesting to start writing and then world build later. And this also takes some of the pressure off because it keeps your drafts very exploratory and exciting instead of being very heavy with rules and things like that. I always want my rules to give me the most dramatic potential or most potential for drama. And so why would I pick the rules until I figure out what the drama is going to be? And the seventh lesson, and this is going to be a little bit repetitive because I was getting a little bit ahead of myself when I was starting to film this video, is that the secret sauce to anything that you write, the secret thing that makes people really connect to it and makes people completely obsessed with it, and they don't really know why, but they just absolutely love it, is your enjoyment of the thing that you write. Your book may be technically correct on paper, it might be structured beautifully, it might be plotted intentionally, and just everything might be technically correct about it. But if you're not feeling completely obsessed, if like the idea just doesn't light up something inside of you that you might not understand yourself, then it doesn't have that like secret element to it that is really, really gonna make it deeply impact readers. If it's not deeply impacting you, it's not gonna deeply impact readers. Chase the fangirl feeling. That's what I've started calling it for myself, is that feeling that I was describing earlier of just being completely obsessed with something and wanting to fangirl over it. If I'm not fangirling over a book that I'm writing, then I know something's not right. And I don't necessarily know what's going to make me fangirl about something, but I just keep chipping away and experimenting and daydreaming until I come up with an idea that just sparks something in me, and then I run with it. I was literally sitting at this desk a couple of days ago, and I was supposed to be getting ready for bed, but I was still writing my book, and I wanted to open up a copy of The Love Trials because right now I'm working on book 2 of this series. I wanted to open this book up just to look something up kind of towards the end because I forgot what a character said at a certain point, or it was something like that. I opened the page to find the thing, and then I just kept reading and reading and reading it until I got to the end of the book, and I finished the book, and then I looked at the time, and it was like an hour and a half after I'd actually started, like picked up the thing, like after I was supposed to go to bed. And I wrote this thing. I know what happens in this book, and still every single time I pick it up, all I want to do is just sit there and read it. I know what happens in this thing, but I still want to read it because I want to experience it because I love the feeling that it gives me. It makes me fangirl so freaking hard. And that is the feeling that I chase now when I write a book. I've never experienced it like I have with this book, and now that is my new bar. And so if I'm not that obsessed with something, I just keep chipping away at it until just keep brainstorming and thinking of things that have made me excited before. I go back to my id list, which is like the list of all of these different tropes and scenes and things that I've consumed in media that I really, really love. I write all those down in a list, like just scenes from other stories, characters, dynamics, locations, everything that has like kind of given me a psychological like, I love that. I have on a list. I go back to that and I revisit that and I try to figure out how I can cram as many things that I love into the story as I can until it gives me that giddy, like fangirly feeling, and then I just totally become obsessed. And it doesn't always happen at the beginning. Like when I started writing Love Trials Book 2, things were going well. It wasn't giving me the feeling that this book gives me, but then I did that and I went back to my id list and I did a lot of thinking, like trying to think of scenes and dynamics and ways that I could put things that I love into the idea. And now I am completely obsessed with it. I can't think about anything else. It's making it really hard for me to do anything else in my life, which is really unfortunate because I am also planning my wedding, which is coming up in like a month. I have a lot to do with that, but all I want to do is work on Love Trials Book 2, and I can't wait to get this whole experience, over with, filming this video so that I can get back to writing Love Trials Book 2. Anyway, those are my 7 lessons that I've learned about drafting. Oh, and I have a bonus one written down here too. My bonus thing and my bonus lesson that I've learned is if you have written books before, if you've completed books and this is not, like if you're not currently working on the first book that you've ever written, see the book that you've finished as guaranteed proof of what you're capable of creating. I fall into the trap of having a published book that I've worked on for a year and that's like polished and like exactly the way that I want it, that I'm so happy with, and everything is like firing on all cylinders and everything's clicking into place and all of the dialogue has life behind it and just everything is working. And then I go back to the drafting board and then I write a draft and it's not as good as my published book, and I'm like, wow, I've peaked already. Like there's no way I'm ever gonna be able to create that again. You know, now I suck. And for some reason just completely forgetting the entire year that I spent working on the other one to make it what it is today. And so I have changed the way that I think about that, and instead now I view the books that I've completed as a guarantee of what I'm capable of creating, like before I even had the skill set, because my skill set is continuing to grow. And so I'm like, I know that I can create that already. This next one is going to be even better. I just need to put in the same time that I did when creating the other one. And that has changed the way that I think about things in a positive way, instead of me constantly thinking that I peaked. So anyway, those are my lessons of like things that I've learned about drafting books and just like generally the way that I like to think about drafting now. I hope that it was interesting or potentially helpful. If you enjoyed this video, I would be super grateful if you could give it a like and also subscribe to my channel. My name is Claire Fraze and I'm an award-winning author of 7 books that makes weekly videos sharing actionable writing tips that helped me make my own writing better. I'm the author of the 5-book completed paranormal thriller They Stay series, and also the Love Trials, which just came out 2 weeks ago as of filming this video. And this is the first book in a series about ghost hunters who hunt the ghosts of serial killers. If you couldn't tell from this video, absolutely love it and I'm so proud of it. I also published my debut novel in high school, which is the 7th published book that I mentioned, and I've written a couple others that I haven't published yet, or might not ever publish at all. But I'm gonna go back to drafting because I'm just now so bursting with excitement that after talking about it that I just really physically cannot do anything else. I hope you have a good week, everybody, and as always, happy writing.